Right now, there's a place on Earth where the pressure would crush you like a soda can in seconds. A place so deep that Mount Everest could fit inside it and still be a mile underwater. Only 22 people have ever been there. Fewer than have walked on the moon. And the creatures that live there, they defy everything we thought we knew about survival. Welcome to the Mariana Trench, the deepest scar on planet Earth. Picture yourself standing at the ocean's surface, directly above the Mariana Trench. You'd never know it. The water looks normal. Fish swim by. Waves roll past. The sun glitters off the surface just like any other part of the ocean. But 36,000 feet beneath your feet lies a world that would kill you in an instant. The trench doesn't even start until you're 16,000 feet down. Everything above that? Just regular ocean. But once you cross that threshold, you enter a realm where the rules of life completely change. Let's say you decided to dive down anyway. How far could you actually make it? The first layer is the sunlight zone, stretching from the surface down to 660 feet. This is your comfort zone. Sunlight still reaches here, bathing everything in shades of blue and green. The water is relatively warm, at least compared to what lies below. You could freedive the shallow parts without equipment. Dolphins play here. Sea turtles glide past. Schools of colorful fish dart through coral reefs. Nothing unusual yet. This is the ocean we know from documentaries and vacation photos. But it's just the beginning of a descent that gets progressively more terrifying with every foot you go down. Once you pass into the twilight zone, things get serious. Between 660 and 3,300 feet, the light fades to a dim blue, then to complete darkness. The water temperature drops dramatically. The pressure starts to build in ways your body wasn't designed to handle. The deepest freedive ever recorded was just 700 feet. And that diver, Herbert Nitsch, was wearing a wetsuit and had years of specialized training. He prepared his entire life for that single dive. Without equipment, without training, you wouldn't make it past here. The pressure, 100 times stronger than at the surface, would crush your lungs instantly. Your rib cage would collapse. Your organs would fail. And this is only the second layer. We haven't even scratched the surface of how deep this trench goes. Beyond that lies the midnight zone, from 3,300 to 13,000 feet. Total darkness. Not the darkness of a room at night, but absolute, complete blackness that no human eye could ever adjust to. The temperature hovers just above freezing. The pressure is strong enough to crumple steel submarines like aluminum foil. If you somehow survived this far, you'd be blind, frozen, and flattened. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite these impossible conditions, life doesn't just exist here, it thrives. And some of these creatures are absolutely massive. This is where we first start to encounter the phenomenon of deep-sea gigantism, where animals grow to sizes that would seem impossible anywhere else on Earth. The abyss, stretching from 13,000 to 20,000 feet, is my favorite zone. And here's why. It's where deep-sea gigantism creates some of the strangest monsters on Earth. The pressure at this depth is so intense that it would compress a human body to the size of a basketball. And yet, life has found a way. The phantom jelly, officially known as Stygiomedusa gigantea, floats through the darkness like a ghost. This jellyfish spans 30 feet across, with ribbon-like tentacles that drift behind it like streamers in slow motion. Only spotted about 100 times in the last century, it remains one of the ocean's most mysterious creatures. It doesn't sting like most jellyfish. Instead, it traps prey on its tentacles like living flypaper, slowly enveloping anything small enough to get caught in its grasp. Then there's the big fin squid, which might be the creepiest thing in the ocean. 25 feet of pale, alien body with impossibly long arms that hang down like broken marionette strings. These arms can be over 20 feet long, just dangling there in the void. We've never caught a living adult specimen. Every sighting has been from remote cameras or deep-sea rovers, and the footage is always unsettling. We don't know how they hunt. We don't know how they reproduce. We barely understand how they exist. They just hover there in the black, arms trailing beneath them, waiting for something to drift by. Scientists believe those long, thin arms are used as fishing lines, but we can't be sure because we've never seen one actually feed. Giant isopods prowl the seafloor, pill bugs the size of footballs. They're related to the tiny bugs you'd find under your porch or in your garden, except these ones are 20 inches long and can weigh up to 4 pounds. They feed on dead whales, fish carcasses, and anything else that sinks down from the upper layers of the ocean. Their bodies are armored with overlapping plates, and they can survive for years without eating. When they do find food, they gorge themselves until they can barely move. These creatures are living fossils, virtually unchanged for millions of years, perfectly adapted to life in the abyss. This zone should be the bottom of the ocean. For most of the world, it is. 95% of the ocean floor sits at depths shallower than this, but not at the Mariana Trench. Here, we're only getting started. The final layer is the hadal zone, reaching from 20,000 feet all the way to the bottom at nearly 36,000 feet. Named after Hades, the Greek underworld. And that's exactly what it is. The pressure here is over 1,000 times what you feel at the surface. That's about 16,000 pounds per square inch. Imagine an entire elephant standing on every square inch of your body. Now imagine 50 jumbo jets stacked on top of you. That's what every creature down here endures, every second of every day. The water temperature is just a few degrees above freezing. There's no light. There hasn't been light here for millions of years. The only illumination comes from bioluminescent creatures creating their own eerie glow. And here's the twist that most people don't know. Deep-sea gigantism stops here. The monsters get smaller again. After watching creatures grow larger and larger as we descended through the ocean layers, suddenly, in the deepest parts, they shrink. It's counterintuitive, but it makes perfect sense when you understand the science behind it. It's simple physics. The bigger you are, the more surface area the pressure crushes. Every square inch of your body is being compressed by thousands of pounds of force. A massive body becomes a liability when every cell, every organ, every bone is under that kind of stress. Your internal structures need to be incredibly strong to resist that pressure, which requires more energy to maintain. Plus, and this is probably the more important issue, there's almost no food. The few scraps that drift down from above, the marine snow made of dead plankton, feces, and organic debris, aren't enough to sustain giants. It takes weeks for anything to sink from the surface to the bottom of the trench. By the time it gets there, it's been picked over by creatures at every layer above. What finally reaches the bottom is barely enough to support the small population of tiny organisms that live there. So, what actually survives at the bottom? The Mariana snailfish holds the record as the deepest living fish ever found. It's not a snail, despite the name. It's a translucent, scaleless fish, with a body so soft and gelatinous, it would collapse under normal pressure at the surface. Its flesh would literally melt if you brought it up too quickly. But down here, in the crushing darkness, that jelly-like body is perfect. It flexes instead of breaking. It bends with the pressure rather than resisting it. Some have been found at 26,000 feet deep, deeper than any other fish species on Earth. They have special proteins in their cells that prevent them from being crushed, and their bones are soft and flexible rather than rigid. There are also amphipods, shrimp-like creatures with special proteins that prevent their cells from imploding. These tiny crustaceans are only a few inches long, but they're survivors in the truest sense. Scientists have found them eating plastic at the bottom of the trench. Yes, our garbage has reached, even here, to the most remote place on Earth. Plastic bags, microplastics, even a candy wrapper have been found at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. It's a sobering reminder that no place on Earth is untouched by human activity. And then there are xenophyophores, single-celled organisms the size of softballs. They're some of the largest single cells on Earth, which is remarkable when you think about it. A single cell, visible to the naked eye, surviving in the most hostile environment imaginable. They build tiny shelters from sand and minerals, cementing particles together to create protective shells. These structures, in turn, create homes for even smaller creatures, providing shelter in an otherwise barren wasteland. In a way, these single-celled organisms are ecosystem engineers, creating habitats where none would otherwise exist. That's it. No giant squids lurking in the depths. No megalodon sharks waiting to devour submarines. No sea monsters like in the old sailor tales. Just a few incredibly tough organisms barely hanging on in the most hostile place on Earth. And honestly, that might be even more impressive than any mythical monster could ever be. These creatures represent the absolute limit of where life can exist on our planet. The hadal zone isn't a battleground of giant monsters. It's a graveyard. A quiet, dark, freezing wasteland where survival means being small, soft, and efficient. It's a place where evolution has pushed life to its absolute limits. The Mariana Trench is just one of about 20 ocean trenches that reach these depths, mostly scattered across the Pacific Ring of Fire. The Tonga Trench, the Philippine Trench, the Kermadec Trench. All of them are cracks in the ocean floor, where tectonic plates collide and tear the Earth open. These trenches are created when one tectonic plate slides beneath another in a process called subduction. The seafloor literally bends and breaks, creating these massive underwater canyons. For decades, we didn't know any of this. The deep ocean was more mysterious than outer space. We had better maps of Mars than we did of our own ocean floor. The first humans to reach the bottom were Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh in 1960. Think about that date. This was before we landed on the moon, before the internet, before personal computers. They descended in a steel capsule called the Trieste, barely big enough for 2 people, and dropped nearly 7 miles into total darkness. The descent took nearly 5 hours. 5 hours of slowly sinking into increasing darkness and pressure, not knowing if the hull would hold, not knowing what they'd find at the bottom. At 35,800 feet, one of their outer windows cracked under the pressure. They heard it happen, a sharp crack echoing through the tiny capsule. At that moment, they had a choice: abort the mission and ascend, or keep going. They still kept going. They reached the bottom, the Challenger Deep, the deepest point in all the world's oceans. They spent 20 minutes at the bottom before ascending, probably staring at that crack the entire way up, wondering if it would give way and flood the capsule. The ascent took another 3 hours and 15 minutes. When they finally surfaced, they had accomplished something no human had ever done before. After that historic dive, no one went back for 52 years. The technology wasn't there. The funding wasn't there. And honestly, the will to risk it probably wasn't there either. In 2012, James Cameron, yes, the Titanic director, decided to change that. He piloted a solo submarine called the Deep Sea Challenger to the bottom. This wasn't just a Hollywood stunt. Cameron is a serious ocean explorer who has spent decades diving and developing underwater technology. His submarine was a vertical torpedo, designed specifically for this single purpose: to reach the deepest point on Earth. The descent took 2 hours and 36 minutes. He described it as lunar, desolate, and completely alien. The seafloor was covered in fine sediment that looked like gray powder. No big animals, no fish, just fine gray sediment and silence. He collected samples, took photographs, and shot the first high-definition footage ever recorded at that depth. He spent 3 hours at the bottom, alone in a capsule barely big enough to turn around in, 7 miles below the surface. When asked what it was like, he said it felt like being on another planet. In 2019, Victor Vescovo broke the depth record by diving to 35,853 feet in his submarine, the DSV limiting factor. That's 52 feet deeper than Cameron's dive, though at those depths, the difference is almost academic. What matters more is that Vescovo didn't just go once, he went multiple times. He spent hours down there, mapping the seafloor and filming creatures no one had ever seen before. His submarine was designed to make repeated dives, which was revolutionary. For the first time, we had a vehicle that could reach the deepest parts of the ocean multiple times, allowing for systematic exploration rather than one-off visits. And during one of those dives, he found plastic bags. At the deepest point on Earth, where fewer than 24 people have ever been, our trash has already arrived. Most of what we know doesn't come from humans, though. It comes from robots, unmanned ROVs, and landers that we drop into the abyss and hope survive. These machines are engineering marvels. They're built with titanium hulls and reinforced glass. The cameras are housed in pressure-resistant casings that can withstand the crushing force. If anything fails, if a seal breaks or a hull cracks, they implode instantly. The implosion is so fast and violent that the machine is destroyed in milliseconds. We've lost dozens of these expensive robots to the depths, crushed before they could send back any data. Even with all our technology, most footage we get is shaky, grainy, and lasts just minutes. The robots move slowly through the darkness, their lights creating small bubbles of visibility in an otherwise black void. When they land on the seafloor, they stir up clouds of sediment that take hours to settle. The conditions are so harsh that batteries drain quickly, and data transmission is difficult. But every mission reveals something new, because the hadal zone is so impossibly hard to explore. We've discovered new species on nearly every dive. Scientists estimate that we've only documented about 5% of the ocean's depths. The remaining 95% is still a complete mystery. The Mariana Trench isn't meant to be conquered. It's not a home for sea monsters or hidden megafauna. It's a pressure cooker, a biological limit, a place where Earth itself says this is as far as life can go. It's a reminder that our planet still holds secrets, still has places where humans cannot easily venture, and yet, life still finds a way. Not by growing bigger, stronger, or scarier, but by becoming softer, simpler, and more resilient than we ever thought possible. The creatures that survive there have stripped away everything unnecessary. No eyes, because there's no light. No scales, because rigid structures would crack. No complex behaviors, because there's nothing to interact with. Just the bare minimum needed to survive. That's the real mystery of the deep. Not what survives down there, but how anything survives at all. These organisms exist at the very edge of what's possible for life on Earth. They show us that life is far more adaptable, far more resilient, far more determined than we give it credit for. In the darkest, coldest, most pressurized environment imaginable, life doesn't just cling on. It finds a way to thrive. And if life can exist there, in the most extreme conditions Earth has to offer, what does that say about the possibility of life elsewhere in the universe?